So Bath have been my most requested club to cover on this series, which is actually unusual considering they've had such a strong season so far. So fixing your club isn't a particularly apt title. However, as the Premiership progresses, I actually think there are more holes which are being exposed in Bath's game, and that this project is actually still in its infancy, which would be both exciting for fans and slightly startling heading into the final round. And in an attempt not to sound too much like a clickbait football pundit, it's their big game results which I'm slightly worried about. When I look at their losses this season, they're all in pretty important games. Losing to Saracens in a top four tie at home last weekend, losing to Exeter in the Champions Cup, losing to Harlequins in a narrow defeat at the Stoop, getting ran through by Bristol in the West Country Derby, Leicester in a one-sided affair in round 10 at Welford Road, and also at home at the Rec too. That's an unusual pair of results. Northampton in the Premiership Rugby Cup and in the Premiership, and Sale away from home in round 7. All very difficult games, but definitely games that title champions would want to win. And a big part of this is fitness, as although Bath have dodged ever having a true injury crisis this season, I also think they have pockets of players and combinations which are always about 5% off, and in a season decided by small margins, it's largely led to results in close games falling on the wrong side. Take a look at that back row, for example, in which Hill, Underhill, and Barbary are likely your three outstanding first choice players. Now, they've all played alongside each other just twice this season, and all three I'd say fit into that injury prone category. They really should have pinched that Saracens game too, but missing Russell meant that again they were missing that 5% needed to overcome significant obstacles. What they've been really good at this season, though, is clearing up against the chasing pack, both in cup competitions and in the league. Whether it was slapping around Cardiff in Europe or making amends with Exeter in the league, they've taken the points you'd expect them to take. Now, that might sound like a minimal compliment, but actually I mean it incredibly positively. The majority of the league are underperforming their expected points this season, and there's never been such a disparity in the league between the bookies' favourites and the eventual winner. Bath actually sit fairly evenly with the bookies' odds. When you look at Bath's stats as well, they are absolutely good for their third spot in the league. It's not like they have these strange, obvious anomalies such as Saracens' poor scrum or Harlequins' pants tackle success. Their attacking stats are pretty good, their defensive stats are top 4 level, their scrum is currently the second best in the league, and their discipline is okay. So I'd go so far as to say that they're probably one of the most balanced sides in the league. But we'll dive a little bit deeper to really understand how the squad is faring comparatively across the league. Starting with that great attack, which is currently one of the most exciting in Europe, if sometimes a little bit inefficient. They are currently beating 21.5 defenders per game, which is third to Harlequins and Bristol. They make just shy of 8 clean breaks per game, which again sits them within that top 4. They've scored the fourth most amount of points with 440, narrowly ahead of Harlequins and just behind Northampton, and they make about 3.48 metres per carry, which is actually nearly a metre more than the likes of Leicester and Newcastle. Like I mentioned though, I do think at times they can be a little bit inefficient, as they need to make 105.1 metres for every try that they're scoring. And what that stat basically means is Bath are failing to convert on territory made from kicks, and are constantly having to bring the ball back before they get over the whitewash. They're also conceding far too many turnovers in attack, with upward of 14 per game, which means that they're just isolating themselves a little too much in the wider channels, and what is quite often the case, forcing the ball too much. Now please note that these turnovers aren't in breakdowns, which I'll eventually get into, but I'm talking about handling errors, mistakes, and penalties too. And I don't want to labour the point too much here, as a 60 try haul in most seasons would be fantastic, but this season we've just seen that extra bit of spice from most sides. I also want to make sure that I highlight how well Blackett has done with this attack this season, as Bath have been largely toothless despite their attacking talent for the last 3 seasons on the trot, and the kick collection stats from Muir and Cokanasiga are so far in front of the rest of the league that their stats almost seem like a miscount. He's created this real pincer-like focal point in which Bath manipulate space out wide and consistently cut back in with great effect. Another season with this backline, I can predict that those inefficiency numbers will rise quickly. Defence-wise, Bath are absolutely top 4 ready, and actually don't work nearly as hard as other teams have to in order to keep other sides out. They have made 1,900 tackles so far in the league this season, a full 600 off of Northampton, and 400 off of Gloucester, 300 off of Sale, and so on and so forth. However, their points difference is better than Northampton. It's better than Harlequins, Sale, Leicester, and many others. That indicates to me that they again have a system which really works here incredibly fluently, and it's disrupting play in less phases, not allowing their opposition to build up time with the ball. Having over 102 turnovers won is also very good, and kind of where I mentioned where I would like to have seen a side like Leicester, who are really defensive, be at this point of the season, not a side with all the possession like Bath. The only concern here is maybe tackle success, which sits at 86%, which isn't bad, but about 6th best in the league. Bath's set piece success is also pretty good, in particular their scrum success, which sits at 93%, which again is one of the best in Europe. They've only lost 5 scrums all season in the league, which is about 0.31 per game, which is only second to a record-shattering Quins scrum that sits at 97% success rate. They could improve at the line-out, as again they sit at 86% success, but in actuality, if they could boost that to around 89%, they'll again be in that top 4 collective. But what about Russell and his famed versatile kicking game? Well, it's been really effective, as despite Bath not even featuring in the top 5 sides for balls kicked out of hand this season, they've made a staggering 14,185 metres in territory. Whereas most sides make around 28 metres per kick and don't retain possession, Bath make around 34 metres per kick, and thanks to those retention and ball chase stats that I mentioned earlier about Muir and Thokanasiga, do regain possession. In short, they push defences backward further and recollect the ball further down the pitch. Goal kicking wise is both a success, and there is also an area to improve here. Russell sits in 3rd for points scored so far this season, narrowly trailing Slade and Smith with 109 points so far, which is really good by the way, but despite this, his kicking success is only 68%. I just want to make a quick off-topic point about this season as well, just on this note, as I don't think a single pundit has raised it at all this season. But the kicking ratios this year are absolutely garbage in the Premiership. Take Bath and Saracens, for example. Both sat on 68%, but both having world-class 10s. Sale with Ford are at 67%. It's been absolutely baffling covering some of these stats so far this season, and the only side that I've really dived deep into that have a kicking ratio over 70% this season are Leicester, who often take the safe points when on offer. I do think a lot of kicking coaches have a lot of work to do, and it's probably why somebody like Henry Slade, who is a good kicker but never really been a first-choice kicker throughout his career, is currently leading the league. Back onto the stats though, and at the breakdown, as I mentioned earlier, Bath don't concede much at ruck time, just in handling errors, and that's because they have a whopping 96% success rate on their own ball. They lose just 3 rucks per game, which realistically is pretty darn solid. They aren't quite as successful in the driving maul though, as they have an 88% success rate there, but that's probably because they don't actually use it very much. Bath only getting to 5.5 mauls a game, which is 2 below the next side, and I think that's down to the body angles of their big runners like Barbary and Abano, who both get to ground before they can really be held up. Discipline-wise, the team is absolutely fine. 7 yellow cards this season and no red cards in the league is about on par with the cleaner sides this year, and 137 penalties conceded, or about 8.56 per game, is actually quite low comparatively with the worst defenders. So when I take a look at all of those stats, it's difficult to pinpoint an area that Bath are going wrong that can't be coached out. Handling errors, a better utilised maul, a bit better tackle success, a bit more efficiency in attack, these aren't big things, but those small percentile losses have definitely cost them games unfairly, which is why I'm quite confident in saying that despite their good performance so far this season, Bath are probably the unluckiest side in the league. So how would I fix a club like this? Well, the squad is actually pretty deep already, and they haven't got that many players leaving this season. Matt Gallagher is a loss, but they are pretty well stocked in versatile back 3 talent. Johannes Jonker has barely played this season. Stefan Emmanuel was never really going to break up that centre combination. Fergus Lee Warner never really featured, and I'd forgotten that Piers Francis was still there until he left. So they've reinforced what I think will be bench options in Van Wyck and Maloney, both fantastic players who could easily start too, but I think the goal there is to bring in better finishers to support Bath in closing out games a little better. Guy Pepper is a great signing, and I know everyone is saying that Bath are stocked for talent in the back row, but they do have terrible injury records, and Pepper is only 21 years old, and likely on an academy contract. Even if he doesn't play that much for the next 2 seasons, you'll still have a Premiership-ready 23 or 24-year-old with excellent ability to come in. They've also made a bunch of academy signings to join this Prem squad, with Kepu Tuipulotu being the exciting name for me. The 18-year-old from Harrow School came through at London Irish's academy, and I predict big things of that youngster. So realistically, I'm kind of reliant on Bath fans telling me where they'd like to upgrade, which is why this will be a Fixing Your Club episode that I'm going to split into 2 parts, or at least 2 parts on YouTube and however many parts this ends up being on TikTok, which is not something I typically do. But I want Bath fans to tell me 3 or 4 positions that they would want to add depth to or upgrade moving into next season. I'll then likely look for options who are relatively cost effective, as the wage bill for this side is already likely abhorrent, and players who I think will add a real impact in a new dimension that we haven't seen before. So make sure that you get your comments in the comment section down below, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe if you're on YouTube, and follow me for more rugby content if you're on TikTok.